asked by fellow dog trainers to participate in the World Dog Trainers Transparency Challenge. I have to answer 3 questions. What happens when the dog gets it right? What happens when the dog gets it wrong? And is there any less intrusive way to train? Now, my answer to what happens when the dog gets it right, I'm assuming that means when the dog offers the correct response or desirable behavior in training sessions or in everyday life. Either the dog gets nothing because the behavior has been highly reinforced and is on a variable ratio of reinforcement. So right now, they're doing a really lovely group settle. I'm not always going to give them a treat, but if I want to reinforce that behavior, I'm going to use either food. For something calm, I'll use food. For something excitable, I'll use toys. And I also love, especially with clients, to use access to the environment and anything that the dog wants. So for walking on a loose leash, for responding to their handler when the handler asks for attention or some behavior like a sit, the dog can then get to do what they wanted to do. So maybe get released into a field to sniff or to get to say hi to a dog or a person. And by making access to the environment contingent on behavior, you can get some really reliable, strong behaviors very quickly. So what happens when the dog gets it wrong? I'm going to interpret that to mean that the dog has offered an incorrect response to a cue, or that the dog is simply offering some undesirable behavior that you don't like. Well, for me, interrupting is a very big part of my training. I love to make sure to manage, prevent, and interrupt behaviors that I don't want to see again, because I don't want them to have a reinforcement history where the dog can regress to doing the behavior again, or simply I don't want my dogs to remember their errors in training sessions. I rather set them up for success so they're practicing just the behavior that I want to get or achieve. So I have many ways to interrupt behavior, but none of them involve any forms of physical or psychological intimidation. I don't say the cues to interrupt dogs in a mean or aggressive or intimidating voice. I use a very calm voice and, like, for example, leave it or here. And what I do instead is I train all the interrupted cues as behaviors themselves, and then when I use them, they don't get a reward after them. So I will proof a leave it cue, and during the training session the dog's getting rewarded for leaving different scenarios and different distractions. But then in a real life scenario, say for example, my puppy is going to bother my adult dog and I don't want him to anymore, I'm going to say leave it. He leaves the dog and I could give him another cue like go to your bed, and he can go to his bed. But I'm not going to reinforce with primary or secondary reinforcers, because I don't want to reinforce a behavior chain of the dog doing the bad behavior first. So in line with interrupting behaviors, you really have to make sure to reinforce alternate behaviors or the absence of the undesirable behavior. So that's a big part about what to do when the dog gets it wrong. You're going to think and plan and follow out a training plan to teach your dog what you do want them to do. Now for my long list of interruptions, I train a positively reinforced attention noise to interrupt behavior, a recall. You can use a cue, an alternate cue. For example, if you don't want your dog to go out the door, you can tell the dog to go to their bed. If you have multiple dogs and there's an emergency situation, you could tell them all to go in their own bed or into their own crate. Other ways of interrupting behavior, the leave it cue, and also I have videos on I think all of the ones I've talked about so far, and a cue to drop it. So say for example your dog picks something up on the ground while you're on a walk, a cue to drop what they have, giving them information. Then leash walking interrupters, giving into leash pressure, and the cue let's go. I have videos on both of those that you can watch. And the point of that is, say your dog is lunging and barking, you need to move your dog and prevent that behavior from being reinforced. But if you haven't trained leash pressure, giving into leash pressure as a behavior in itself, it can be very stressful, frustrating, and punishing to the dog. So instead, we're going to teach the dogs that giving into the pressure on leash is actually a cue to mean move with me, and it makes dogs' lives less frustrating and stressful when we teach them what we want them to do. Okay, so what have I got there? Another solution, if you have a tiny little puppy, they're chewing on the wall, they don't listen to you, just get the dog, go pick the puppy up and put them in their pen. You don't want to do it in an intimidating way, there's no need to do it. You want to do it in the most neutral way possible. Get the puppy, put them in their pen. If your puppy was scared of being picked up, that's definitely something you should work on in the future to get your dog to love being handled and not at all frightened of any type of grooming or handling behavior like being picked up or checked for fleas or ticks. So a big part of what to do when the dog gets it wrong is also teaching dogs coping skills. So if you're going to need to move your dog on leash, or if you're going to need to take your dog to the vet, these behaviors of being touched and manipulated are not going to be stressful for the dog because you reinforce them. Okay, what others? I have another way to interrupt undesirable behavior. I use a food lure. So in training tricks, if my dog does a behavior I don't like, or an incorrect response to a cue, I'll simply whip out the food lure, show them what I want, but not give them the treat, then make criteria easier, and usually the dog will succeed very quickly. An example of this is a down stay. I say down, the dog stays, and then they get up. I'm going to quickly rush over there, not in an intimidating manner, lure the dog back into the down position, and then make the distraction a little bit easier. And then there's the obvious. If you think your dog hasn't heard the cue properly, you can try saying the cue again. If you know your dog is reliable with the behavior and they were just distracted by a noise or a big truck went by right as you said the cue, obviously maybe they didn't hear. But I would say if your dog doesn't respond more than 2 times, it's obvious there's a problem that you need to solve. Also, if it's the same cue that you have to repeat twice, there is definitely a problem. So repeating cues definitely tells you there's something amiss with your training plans. Question number 3. Are there any less intrusive ways to train dogs? Now, a lot of my friends and colleagues have been answering no, not that I know of, or otherwise I'd be training that way. And I totally believe that's a correct answer. However, just for fun, I'm going to say yes, there are less intrusive ways to train. And what do I mean by that? Well, when I look back at footage of myself training 3 or 4 years ago, I see that I personally think that I've improved to make my training more reliable, less stressful for the dogs, and less frustrating because my observation skills have increased, my timing, rate, and criteria skills have increased, and I hope in the future that I won't still be training the same that I am now. I would like to continue to get better and better. Another reason why I answer yes is because there's always opportunities to work on your dog's coping skills, teaching them to cope with their environment and teaching them to cope with everyday life. Trish, for example, my spouse's dog, used to be really scared of people, really scared of being touched, and specifically scared of when you go through a doorway together. If you're in the doorway and she tries to go through it, or if you go through together, she sometimes has a regression where she gets scared of feet. So I could work on it more than I do. It's been maybe a year since I worked on it, so that's something that I plan to do in the future. And now that I've talked about it, I have to do it. Tug, my terrier, doesn't really like handling very much, so I need to work on handling more with him. Other things, Splash in very social environments, Lumos around dogs, Lacey going to pet stores because she's pretty scared of going to pet stores for some reason, so building it up so that she can come more places with us. And Kiko, let's think, maybe working more with having visitors come through the door where she doesn't get overexcited. And Bark. So she's been doing really good, but obviously there's always more you can do. And so to diminish your dog's stress and frustration in their everyday life. So think of it as a challenge to yourself. Are there any problems that you're having with your dog that you've been putting on the back burner? Maybe it's time to think about them again and consider it as part of your training. That it could be less stressful if you conditioned your dog to love having their nails trimmed, for example, rather than just being like, oh, I'll do that some other time. Okay, well, I'm not going to nominate other people to make a video like this. Instead, I'm going to give you the opportunity to make a video yourself if you want to. I'm not going to use a name. So, it was lovely chatting. I will talk to you guys later. Bye!